Good afternoon. I'm actually going to provide you with a brief synopsis of the workshop 2 that was part of the Teaching and Learning Symposium today. I'm just going to share my slides and I'm going to give you a kind of an overview of what we did within this workshop so that you can have it as an aid memoir. So our core kind of aim in this workshop was to actually provide you with a number of opportunities to engage with active learning methodologies from an experiential point of view, but also to think about them from a strategic point of view, how it is you and I would actually integrate those into our practice. But in so doing, for what end? To support the learners in what way? What levels of learning are we actually after? What kind of engagement are we after? And what does it look like? So in that regard, we need to be able to be adaptive within our own practice to map a multitude of different kind of opportunities to enhance learning, the opportunities for learning in this way. However, what we most certainly need to do is make sure that whatever active learning opportunity we integrate or choose to integrate, that it is both manageable, and by that I mean easy to use, that it is effective and purposeful, that it is on point, that it is doing what we want it to do for the benefit of our learners and hopefully for the benefit of us too, but also that it's sustainable, that we can use it time after time, but also we can use it in a meaningful way, a way that isn't going to kind of impinge or increase our workload exponentially, that makes it simply not possible to maintain. So what the workshop is going to do, or what the workshop has done, and what this slideshow will do is give you a little kind of overview of what active learning is and the different kind of modalities therein from the literature. I'm actually going to talk to the activities that were done in the workshop by way of explanation and what the purpose was. But obviously we're not going to do them here in this particular session. And then I suppose what is most important is to recognize that the whole premise of actually integrating active learning is how will it enable our learners to enhance their learning? In what ways? So what is the purpose? What is the core purpose behind this? So let's kick off. The first activity is called the first slide. This is a lovely kind of opportunity to actually throw something up at the beginning of the session to engage our learners in an anonymous way, in a way that is kind of open-ended. There is no kind of issue in terms of actually participating. You're just asking students to think about something. Obviously, it's kind of pertinent to the kind of particular topic and domain at the time. And you're trying to kind of draw out of them what it is that you wish them to be able to think about. And maybe it acts as a catalyst to the beginning of the session and what it is that we will actually kind of undertake therein. So moving on in terms of what actually active learning is. So I suppose what this particular paper actually is rather nice because it looks into a multitude of different forays into active learning, and it dissimulates what are the kind of core components. And I suppose the definition that it gives is simply to offer active learning opportunities to promote student engagement. It's lovely, it's big, it's broad, but it doesn't tell us that much. But what it does tell us is that there is a way of enhancing learning, of enabling our learners to become actively engaged, to empower them. And what does this actually look like? Well, in one way, it perhaps enables our learners to become creative, to actually kind of engage in creative process. It enables them to foster a different array of skills other than the discipline domain, to develop those transversal skill sets and skills for life beyond the kind of particular program that they may be involved in. But most importantly, there is always an opportunity to engage in authentic, in practice-based activities, things that are tangible and real world that will actually kind of stand to them, both in terms of their learning, perhaps through research, through clinical placements, but also in terms of what that means to their future profession and who they may be. Another perspective upon active learning is to think about it from a student-centered perspective. And this actually is very much important when we think about our curriculum design. And I suppose what student-centered learning actually does is enables the students to become the author of their own destiny, that self-determination, to recognize their agency and what it is they wish to do and how they want to do it. And how they want to do it may materialize in a constructive means by collaborating and discussing and interacting with peers and leveraging that knowledge, that experiential knowledge that they already have, and making it meaningful. But another piece to the puzzle of this is to make certain that they have the opportunity to create something, to apply something, to make something real from their learning. And that idea of constructionism and mapping the skills that they have acquired into something tangible and real world is really important, both from a motivational perspective, but also from a learning perspective, because it gives an opportunity for engagement at a whole nother level. So what does the classroom look like in this regard? In reality, there are loads of different modalities that you and I can use. And if anything, it should be a clarion call to provide an open and engaging session. And that happens in a multitude of ways, both from asking open-ended questions to providing opportunities to interact with peers, to creating problems to challenge the students' agency, their hegemony of ideas and concepts, and to actually enjoy the learning process. So there's a lovely kind of milieu of different kind of activities that you and I can use. But what is evident from the literature is that there are particular kind of domains and dimensions about what our students wish and what it is they want to do in regard to active learning and engagement. And in one way, what we're trying to do here is enable them to become, self-regulate their own learning, to recognize what and why they do something, to buy into something from a collegial, collective, a social perspective, and recognize the impact and import of what it is they might do, but also to challenge them. And I suppose to kind of quote the kind of problem-based learners amongst us, to use that notion of hard fun as a way of actually kind of buying into something, to kind of have the threshold concept to challenge one's belief structure. And getting through that is often cathartic, an enjoyable piece whereby you suddenly realize that, yes, it was hard to do, but now I know why, and now I know the impact of that. So having that kind of overarching kind of cognitive piece is really important to challenge our learners, both from a metacognitive perspective, but also from the individual perspective. Icebreakers. So here is our second activity. So the first one was simply an anonymous open-ended question to provoke, challenge, and invite students to engage. This one is about the social interaction. And icebreakers are often used at the beginning of a session, but of course they can be used at any time to re-energize a given session. In this particular instance, we're inviting not only students to kind of introduce themselves, but also to actually undertake a particular task, i.e. we're giving clear direction about what that icebreaker is. In this instance, it's the modality of actually showing your hand. It's a little bit of kinesthetic physical activity. So it's not just chatting, it's actually kind of giving them a countdown, giving them a visual cue, both in terms of a face-to-face setting, but also in an online setting. In an online setting, what this begets is for someone to actually turn on their camera if they haven't already done so. So it's a nice surreptitious way of making sure that everyone is engaged and enabled in this particular activity. So what might be the characteristics of active learning that are emerging? So increased engagement, obviously, but what does that look like? We will come momentarily to different kind of means and modalities about how it is and what it is you might choose to do that. The emphasis on skills development, absolutely, but at what level? Again, we'll look to that in a moment about what that might mean and how we can develop that out. Increased motivation, that agency, that self-determination, that individualization of one's learning is at such a motivational hook in any realm, and having authentic activities and professional tasks that mean something. The other piece that comes out of active learning is the opportunity to provide feedback, immediate feedback. Many of the activities that will actually occur are going to be, in their nature, formative. They're going to be assessment of and for learning. So thus, there is an opportunity, a real opportunity to capitalize on that and give our learners immediate feedback about how well they're doing, what it is they've done, and what it is they've yet to do. And the final piece, the higher order thinking. Active learning instills in its nature part of a continuum, a process of learning, from understanding the core concepts and the materials, to identifying them, to analyzing them, to breaking them asunder and creating something new. And to have that metacognitive approach is most evident for our long-time learners. And that's really important in terms of coming out of a program perspective and not only just kind of modular perspective. So next activity up. 1 minute paper is a simple way of actually engaging our learners in identifying an issue, responding to a particular question, But in what it does is enables them to clarify and identify what are the core components, what is the kind of nub of the matter at hand. In this instance, we used a rolling scroll within the Poll Everywhere tool to capture people's thoughts as they occurred and to recognize what are the challenges that you have or may have when integrating active learning. And some of those that were coming up were about students' perceptions, their receptivity to being engaged, their lack of preparation, the technology that one might use, the workload considered to be involved in developing active learning opportunities. All of these, hopefully, we can address as we kind of move through this presentation beyond. So the next thing that we were looking at is to consider Bloom's cognitive process dimensions and to consider how it is that we might capitalize on these as a means to instill activity within our modules, yes, but also within our sessions. So yes, we may use Bloom's cognitive levels as a way of qualifying and writing learning outcomes, but we can also break that down further, and we can use them as a means, like a catalyst, to engage activity within the session. So we may have it from a module perspective in terms of what one's end game is. You will be able to understand, to develop, to create an active learning strategy. But when it comes to an activity, you can use the same active verbs to crystallize exactly what that activity is doing. And thus, from an assessment point of view, a formative assessment point of view in any given session, it enables the learners to know exactly what it is they're doing, why they're doing it, and hopefully give an output that is measurable and tangible, so they know exactly what it is they have done and what it is perhaps they have left to do in that regard. So using these active learning verbs from the knowledge dimension will enable us to set up a really clear and transparent way of writing learning activities into any given session. So, next activity that was undertaken is a very simple one, but actually quite a fun one. In an online environment, we were trying to use the new whiteboard within Zoom to enable people to put dots on a particular aspect of the cognitive process dimension, i.e. which one comes up most commonly in their sessions. And by the very nature, most of them were kind of towards one particular end of the continuum. In a real world, in a face-to-face setting, this can be used on a poster wall, this can be used on a screen, but the fact of it is, in the face-to-face session, people are going to get up and they're going to make their vote known. They're going to get up and they're going to talk to one another as they go. So it's going to be a lovely little kind of interactive and engaging, a physically engaging way of actually kind of ascertaining a consensus or kind of a collective knowledge base upon a particular topic. Really simple tool, really good way of actually capturing information like that. And even in a large lecture theatre, yes, you might kind of invite 200, 300 people to stand up and walk over to a particular side of the lecture theatre to make their points known. It may take 5-10 minutes. Is it worth it? You'll have to try it and see. So what we are trying to perhaps focus on is to give weight to the actual session that you and I teach, and to try and design it in such a way that we are clear and purposeful about the activities that might occur therein. So treat this as a set of questions to oneself. What exactly are the session objectives? So we're not talking about the module outcomes here. What are the objectives of the session? I.e., what are the micro outcomes within that session? So for argument's sake, for this particular session, I could say that one of the micro outcomes is to introduce the way or means to consider how to design a session, and then to identify the particular elements thereof, and maybe even to hierarchically decide which one is most important and so forth. So identify, hierarchically decide, those kind of active verbs immediately beget a particular activity in your mind. How will they do this? What is it that they will do? Will they write something? Will they discuss something? Will they create a poster? Will they respond to a poll? And that's really important because that there is the activity. But more importantly, from an assessment point of view, that's a formative opportunity because you can see the learning occurring. You can see the result of what has happened from that activity. And so can the learners. From a plenary point of view, they will see, or norm reference, they will see what it is they have done in comparison to their peers. You and I can reconsider or realign what it is they need to know if they're off piste, so to speak. But that's a really kind of fundamental and lovely opportunity for formative activities within a session. So think about that clearly. Think about what it is you would like to do and how you would like to do that. So your question of what exactly it is you might do, from the assessment perspective, classroom assessment techniques are often overlooked. Those formative activities that we do in session are often kind of just done and forgotten about. But in reality, there are so many of them. We need to capitalize on and crystallize them in our students' minds. This is a formative activity. This is a formative assessment activity that will enable you to be better prepared for, to prep for, to design, to create something in advance of summative assessment, or so forth and so on. And in that way, there are loads of lovely opportunities that one might use. From, examples here from inquiry reports, draft research bids, role plays, creating a video, making a presentation, having discussions and debates, all very simple things that could be kind of capitalized on. We may even go further and have criteria with which to assess these on. We may even go further again and have a rubric with which the students could use to realize what it is they're doing in regard to a particular activity, i.e. to prep them for it. This is what we're going to be doing in session in regard to this presentation. This is the rubric. Have you done this, this, and this? How well have you done this, this, and this? So forth and so on. So lovely opportunities to create an activity that is not only both meaningful, but actually will enable the learner to be to engage in assessment of or for learning as they proceed. Another way of thinking about this is simply to consider a traditional lecture or a traditional session in terms of a beginning, a middle, and end, i.e. this is what we're going to do, this is what we are doing, and this is what we've just done. And in that way, you're kind of talking about introductions. You're talking about perhaps a little kind of diagnostic question, MCQ question. You're talking about perhaps having a brainstorming event at the beginning to see where people's thoughts are about something. In the middle, you're kind of addressing problems or kind of schemata, or actually kind of making presentations about what it is you know, what it is you might know, and so forth and so on. And at the end, you're actually either reflecting on what has happened, or you're perhaps analyzing a case study or critical incident to determine what it is you have to do going forward or yet to do. So these, opportunities for active learning are multi-purpose and manifold. So think about not only what you might do is an assessment, formative assessment opportunity, but where might it happen? The beginning, the middle, or the end, and what is the impact there of each of those activities that you might engage with. So the next workshop activity was a Procon grid, a pros and cons. And what we did is we gave you the link to a Google slide that was already kind of set up like a pro forma. And we simply asked you to have a discussion about what particular activity you might use, perhaps on the preceding two slides. But more importantly, we did a little sneaky thing here. We asked you to define why. What are the the pros? What are the kind of benefits of actually undertaking that particular activity as opposed to another one? And if you're using the activity, what are the cons? So in one way, you're actually beginning to not only decipher what it is you might use, but you're now looking at making a judgment about why you might use that. Doing that or changing up the subtlety of an activity immediately changes the concept in terms of the level of the learning, what it is that's actually happening and why it's happening. But more importantly here, using the Google Slides shares it to a whole group. They see the thought processes of all the groups. They see the different kind of activities that have been used, and they get ideas, they cross-feed and cross-share knowledge from that perspective. So having that kind of collaborative endeavor becomes a cooperative and plenary piece whereby everyone gets to see and share what has happened within that particular activity. So a real interesting one that can be used both online and in a face-to-face setting with no major issues. So coming back to that session design and coming back specifically to creating the particular kind of learning objective, to composing that learning objective and making sure that it's meaningful. This is a simple run through in terms of actually kind of making that happen. What we have done is we have given you a task, and indeed it's a homework task in regard to the workshop, about how you might actually kind of take the time to write up a couple of these and see what becomes of the activity. So i.e. having a upfront specific objective enables that activity to be much more crystallized in its intention and its purpose, not only for you and I, but also for the learner in terms of what ought to happen and how it ought to happen. In regard to how you might do this, we have an activity in the workshop that we were going to set you to, which was simply to use the think, pair, share piece. And that's simply getting the individual to consider their own perspective first and foremost, to team up with another and to kind of tease out, to share that cognitive load, to kind of reinforce, to articulate one's ideas and see how they stand up to scrutiny, and then to collectively share that and figure out, you know, where it fits within the kind of greater scheme of things. The think, pair, share piece, many of us have used this in multiple ways, in multiple kind of perspectives, but it is a really kind of powerful piece, one that can be used not only in a small group setting, but also in a big group setting where the pairs, you know, map around a couple of times, and thus you're kind of increasing that, you know, knowledge base. You're increasing and refining the discussion points that have come up, so much so that by the end of it, there's a lovely kind of, you know, shared knowledge or cooperative knowledge throughout the kind of given class in that regard. So this is the kind of Google document that you've been given. You're asked to copy out that page and set to work on creating your own particular micro outcomes or learning objectives per session. And the table on the right, which comes from the workbook, page 8, is simply a list of active verbs that one might use to initiate that activity. And so thus, any of those verbs that you choose to use, whether you want to say differentiate or grade or judge or identify, immediately begets an activity. And then what exactly is going to happen? And so what should happen is the activity should happen, but it should be tangible, it should be measurable. You should see the output of whatever that activity is right there and then, both from a learner perspective and indeed from our perspective, so that we can give immediate feedback on what has happened and results of that. So final suggestions in terms of active learning and integrating it into your practice. First thing to think about is yourself. Choose what you are comfortable with. Start small. Start with something that you are amenable to, that isn't going to kind of cause you any issue in terms of new technologies, in terms of, you know, preparation and so forth. Yes, of course you can start big, but start smaller is better. But what I will say is to be fearless, to actually recognize that sometimes we have to change up things within a session anyway. When we're teaching a session and we try to, you know, explain a particular topic or particular concept, and we know that it's troublesome, that it's problematic, we are all the time on the fly responding to what we see in our learners. And so it should be with, you know, developing active learning opportunities. We should recognize that actually, do you know what would work here? If they simply had a moment to discuss, if they had a moment to reflect individually, if we actually created a list of the major issues arising, then we could discuss those. So those kinds of things, being adaptable in that regard, is really important. But what's most important is to make sure that you and I give an opportunity for engagement. And what I mean by that is simply allowing our learners the opportunity to work with the materials in a meaningful way, an authentic way, a way that they are able to assimilate the information from their perspective and capitalize and utilize it in a way that's meaningful to them, to work with their peers towards a particular end, i.e. a clear activity, a clear formative activity that will enable them to prepare, to design, to prep for something. And also, in all of these endeavors, what happens by the by is that you and I become center stage. So it's not that we let our students go and do an activity on their own. We become much more facilitative, much more open to engaging with our learners at particular points in the process, or simply in a plenary matter, whereby we can give that feedback or indeed feed forward about how to improve, how to prepare for whatever activity may come next. So final task of the workshop was a 30 seconds, not even a 1-minute paper, a 30-second reflection, quick thought. What might be the most beneficial activity for your learners? And more importantly, how can you actually make it happen? Simple things are often best left that way. So The slides are available. The workbook is available. If you have any questions for either Leonie or I, please don't hesitate to make contact with us. This video will be available post-session. I hope you enjoyed the workshop if you were there. If you didn't, feel free to have a go at the activities. The links will be available after the session for all to engage with. So take care. I hope you enjoyed the 2022 Teaching and Learning Symposium, and we hope to see you soon.